Going into the 2013 season, the Houston Texans had a lot of hope. They'd just come off of a franchise-best 12 wins and had an active streak of back-to-back AFC South titles, winning playoff games in both 2011 and 2012. Expectations were high, and many media outlets placed them in the mix for Super Bowl contention. They had the 6th highest odds to win going into the season. By January, all that hope was gone. What was supposed to be a continuation of the success seen in the 2 years prior turned into a catastrophe of a season that resulted in the largest single-season drop in the power rankings. It left Houston thinking, what happened? How do we get here? Power rankings are kind of useless. They're a gimmick used to stir up controversy by subjectively ranking teams based on feel rather than fact. Despite their shortcomings, people love them. It's fun to see where your team falls on the list and agree or disagree with whoever ranked them there. And one of the things power rankings does do somewhat well is give an idea of the current general sentiment toward a team's expected success. And the Texans' Week 1 4th place power ranking made sense logically. Arian Foster had cemented himself as one of the best running backs in football. Established All-Pro Andre Johnson and rookie DeAndre Hopkins were ready to make waves in the receiving game. And reigning Defensive Player of the Year J.J. Watt anchored a stout Texan defense that had finished 2nd and 7th in allowed yards per game the past 2 seasons. Their quarterback room was less than stellar, but Week 1 starter Matt Schaub was coming off of a Pro Bowl season, and when their skill position players and defense were firing on all cylinders, the Texans seemed like a tough team to beat. And for the first 2 games, that rang true. The Texans opened up the season with 2 straight wins over the San Diego Chargers and Tennessee Titans, but these wins didn't come easy and might have been a sign of things to come. The Texans were down 28-7 in the 3rd quarter against San Diego, a team ranked 29th in the power rankings. They needed a miraculous comeback and did just that, scoring 24 straight points to get the win by 3. The next week, they trailed late in the 4th quarter again against the 24th ranked Titans. If not for some late game heroics by Arian Foster and a game-winning touchdown catch by DeAndre Hopkins, they would have lost this game too. Through the first 2 weeks, their ranking remained pretty stable. Unfortunately, their less than stellar quarterback room caught up to them, and over the next few weeks, Matt Schaub became the catalyst for what would prove to be the turning point of the season. Schaub made history by becoming the first quarterback to throw a pick-6 in back-to-back-to-back-to-back games. In that 4-game stretch, Schaub had as many interceptions returned for touchdowns as Aaron Rodgers has thrown in his entire career, and they fell to 13th in the power rankings. But the pick-6 streak ended in Week 6, and the tide began to shift. Against the St. Louis Rams, Houston's offense gained 420 yards and 27 first downs, nearly doubling the offensive output of the Rams. Their offensive explosion netted them a grand total of 13 points. The Rams scored 38. The last of those 38 coming on a 98-yard pick-6, thrown not by Matt Schaub, but TJ Yates. Schaub had suffered a leg injury earlier in the game, and Texans fans cheered when he was taken off the field. He would go on to miss a couple weeks and was ultimately benched in favor of rookie Case Keenum. By the time Schaub made it back as a starter in Week 16, he might have wished his leg injury had kept him on the sidelines for the rest of the year, because what ensued was a masterclass in the art of losing. Case Keenum started the next 8 games for the Texans. His first start came in Week 7 against the undefeated Kansas City Chiefs, and he played well, throwing for 271 yards and a touchdown. But with the Texans down 1 late in the 4th quarter, Keenum fumbled away the football to secure the win for the Chiefs. After a bye week in Week 8, the Texans faced the Colts in Week 9. Keenum passed for 350 yards and 3 touchdowns, and the Texans went into halftime up 21-3. On the way to the locker room, head coach Gary Kubiak collapsed. He suffered a mini stroke and had to be taken to the hospital. The loss of Kubiak proved to be significant for the Texans, as Indianapolis came roaring back in the second half, outscoring Houston 24-3 to win the game 27-24. The loss dropped Houston to 2-6 and to 20th in the power rankings. In Week 10, Keenum threw for 3 touchdowns for a second consecutive game, and just like the previous one, Houston lost 24-27. Week 11, another 1-possession loss. Week 12, another 1-possession loss. This time to the division rival Jaguars, that had 1 win up until that point and were ranked dead last in the power rankings. In Week 13 against the 4th-ranked Patriots, the Texans jumped out to a 17-7 lead at halftime and had a 3-point lead early in the 4th quarter. But just as they had done so many times before, the Texans squandered the lead thanks to a couple of 53-yard field goals by Stephen Gostkowski, and once again, the result was a 1-possession loss. The loss dropped them down a spot to 31 in the power rankings, with the lowly Jacksonville Jaguars the only team below them, which happened to be their next opponent. Despite riding a 10-game losing streak, the Texans were favored to win on the road by 3 points. In the 3rd quarter, the Jaguars took a commanding lead following a 48-yard run by Maurice Jones-Drew, and a reverse pass touchdown to put Jacksonville up 24-10. With Case Keenum struggling, the Texans turned to Matt Schaub, and in typical Texan fashion, Schaub pulled them to within one possession, and then threw the ball right to Jaguars linebacker Geno Hayes. Another one-possession loss. The loss meant that Houston had been swept by Jacksonville in the season series, and the next day, after 8 seasons leading the team, head coach Gary Kubiak was fired. The Texans fell to last in the power rankings, a spot they wouldn't relinquish for the remainder of the season. Keenum went on to start one more game, a 25-3 blowout loss against the Colts. He suffered a thumb injury during that game and didn't start for the rest of the year. During his time as the Texans starter, Keenum was 0-8, with the first 7 of those losses coming in one-possession games. With Keenum injured, Schaub got the starting job for the last 2 games of the season and lost them both, throwing 1 touchdown and 4 interceptions in those games. And with that, the Texans wrapped up 2013 with a 2-14 record, the worst record in the league. Going into the year, they were projected to win 10.5 games. They finished 8.5 games under their projection. That minus 8.5 win differential is the worst margin since win projections first became tracked in 1989. But if you look at the Texans' team stats, they didn't seem 2-14 type of bad. Their offense finished 11th in total yards gained, and their defense looked good too, ranking top 10 in defensive yards allowed. But there are a couple of metrics that explain the Texans' struggles, starting with a minus 20 turnover differential, the worst in the league. Pair that with a field goal percentage that was third to last at 74.3%, and the result is an offense that generated 1.29 points per drive, the second fewest that year. Whether you attribute the Texans' shortcomings to the coaches or the players, at least part of it comes down to sheer luck, or in the Texans' case, lack thereof. Given the stats they had, the Texans should have expected to win 4 games. But to win games in the NFL, sometimes you need a lucky bounce here and there, and the Texans received no help from the football gods in 2013. Just inopportune times. They were just all around unlucky, and the sequence against the Titans really sums up the season well. With the game tied at 24 with 5 seconds left, Randy Bullock lines up from 51 yards. Despite missing 2 field goals earlier in the game, he drills it, but the Titans called a timeout. The next attempt was blocked by Michael Griffin, but Griffin was offsides. So we move up 5 yards to the 46-yard line and try again. This time, Bullock pulls it left, and the game remains tied. But the Titans called a timeout again, so he gets one more shot at it. And after all that, Bullock doinks it off the upright. The Texans had nothing going for them in 2013. No matter how many chances they were given, they always seemed to come up short. The Texans should have won more games than they did in 2013. But that doesn't make it any less of a disappointment for Texans fans. What people thought would be a potential Super Bowl run turned into a dud of a season. But the Texans rebounded quickly with 5 winning seasons in the 6 years following 2013. Perhaps their success after 2013 was a regression to the mean, but it doesn't take away from the reality that sandwiched between 2 streaks of solid football, the Texans showed just how bad things could get. It was a